And we are live. Hello, Mr. Johnson. Please introduce yourself for the audience that doesn't know you.
Hi, George. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am a retired Secret Service agent. And it's one of the many things I've done in law enforcement. And I guess I'll start chronologically with how I started off. And obviously the first thing was education, was college. I graduated with a degree in criminal justice from Pace University. I did a few years with my father in his business, so I started a little bit late in my criminal justice career. But my first job in federal law enforcement was with the Central Intelligence Agency, and I was a security protective officer there. What we did we were in charge of security for the CIA, for their property and their employees. We did patrols. We worked posts inside the CIA building and other buildings that CIA did business in the DC area and Northern Virginia area. I also we did some screening of classified material. We would set up checkpoints as employees would leave in the evening, and we would check to make sure they weren't leaving with any classified documents. And that was good. It was a good start. It was very good training. I think I learned a lot from there. I did, after about 3 years, I decided I wanted to try local law enforcement, and I came back up to New York, where I was from, and I worked for the Putnam County Sheriff's Department as a correction officer. And in that position, I was responsible for the inmates in a county jail. We did some inmate transports. We would do some court security. We would work if an inmate was sentenced to state prison, we would transport them to state prison. And and I did that for about a year and a half. And then I had applied for the Secret Service, and I didn't hear anything. And then they called me up and they said, "Hey, we have openings for the uniform division. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'm interested." And I went back to federal law enforcement and moved back down to the DC area and started out as a uniform division officer with the Secret Service. In that position, I was predominantly a uniformed police officer with full police powers in the DC area. And most of the time I was outside the fence line of the White House. I was assigned to the White House division. So I dealt with homeless people. We dealt with some protests. We dealt with, different crimes that happened to go through the outside of the gate. That was, different thefts and different stuff like that in parks and things like that. And then while I was with the uniform division, I had the ability to take what was called the Treasury Enforcement exam, because at the time the Secret Service was part of the Treasury Department. And the Treasury Enforcement exam was one of the criteria to become a special agent for the Secret Service. So I took that test, and I was lucky enough, I did well, and I was able to transfer from the uniform division to the position of special agent. And the openings that we had there were back up in New York. So I wound up coming back to New York, which was my home, my family, my friends, which I was happy about. And I did over 20 years in the New York area. I did a full-time protection assignment for President Clinton when he was first out of office, when he resided up in Chappaqua, New York. As far as work with the Secret Service does criminal cases and protection. So I did a lot of different criminal work in different squads throughout the Secret Service. I was in bank fraud. I was in credit card fraud. I did protective intelligence cases. I was assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I was a recruiter towards the end of my career, where I did applicant cases and interviewed applicants for positions, and approved or disapproved some of the different applicants for those positions. And then I retired, and I went to work for a tech company called Salesforce, a cloud-based tech company in New York. And I've been with Salesforce for about 5.5 years, and I run their security program in New York and in Washington, D.C. So that's pretty much an overview of the last 30 or so years of my life from a professional standpoint.
When it came to your work at the CIA, I want to like really go in order when I'm asking about these parts, right? So when it came to like your work at the CIA, what did that really look like? You know, how would you screen somebody for having classified documents?
Well, it was simple. When they left, it was back in the good old days where people had briefcases, and it wasn't computer. You had to physically have a document. When we set up a table as at the exits, people walked past. They were required to open up their briefcase, and we did an inspection. If we found classified documents, well, that was a violation. That was a problem. Very rarely we found it, but like most things in security, what we were was we were a deterrent for people would not do that because they thought that there could be a checkpoint. So it's like most things. It's very rarely that it did occur, especially because the vast majority of the CIA employees did follow proper classified document procedures. So it wasn't that thing, but it was something there that somebody that would try to do something like that might might become a deterrent for them not to because of what we provided as a security measure.
So when you did find a classified document, like let's just say, like whatever that might be, right? Whatever that could entail, somebody, you stop them at one of the checkpoints and they have a classified document. What do you do from there?
Well, what we would do at that point is we would alert our supervisors, and they would enlist with CIA investigators, and then those cases would be taken internally. So we wouldn't get past the point of, we would just identify it, and then other entities would take care of it. There may have been a reason for it. There may have been things that we didn't have any information of, but really we were just there as the first layer to prevent that from happening. And then it went up to a higher authority to determine what would happen in those instances.
Well, you went from law enforcement, like criminal justice degree directly into the CIA, right? Which is, it's a lot of people commonly consider the CIA not to be a form of law enforcement, right? Because it's an intelligence gathering agency, right? So how did like a criminal justice degree play into that?
Okay, well, the position that I had with the CIA was we did have limited police powers. We had limited police powers on CIA property, which gave us the ability to enforce federal laws and statutes while on CIA property. It was clearly defined where we were police officers and where we weren't, but a type of position like that, it was important to have a law enforcement background or a law enforcement mindset. So that's why they recruited people with those backgrounds for that position. I didn't have to have a criminal justice degree. There were some people that I worked with that didn't have criminal justice degrees, but that was one of the things that the CIA thought would be a good quality for a candidate in that position. So also we had firearms. We went to a police academy, a training academy. We did a lot of different defensive tactics. We did a lot of different training. So it was something that was conducive to somebody who would be in the law enforcement field.
Right. So it related very heavily. It wasn't like oil on water.
Definitely not. Definitely not. It related. It was predominantly security work, but a large portion of law enforcement work really it coexists with security and law enforcement. So
Right. So when you were effectively like, a security guard, I guess for lack of a better term, for the
yep,
CIA.
exactly.
Right. Yeah. So when it did come time for you to become a police officer in a regular setting, how did that differ?
Well, it all depends on your role. It depends who you have to protect, what your role is. Like a correction officer is not a police officer. A correction officer is a peace officer. You have peace officer status. You can carry a weapon for certain circumstances, and you have the ability to act on certain state laws because it was a state position. So it's kind of really it's a progression. It's one you find similarities with the things that you've done in past in past professions. So it was kind of a different field, but again, it was something that, I think the correction officer position, the biggest thing you needed to do to be successful in that was to deal with people, and not to deal with people not always that are on their, on the in the best part of their life. So, and you still need to get them to do what you need them to do, so there's not chaos in a jail setting, and you need to use your interpersonal skills and your communication skills, and you need self-awareness, which is situational awareness, which is pretty much similar qualities to being a police officer.
Right. And then when it came time for you to be back in federal law enforcement, or rather the federal government, with the Secret Service, of having the job, because you were in the Secret Service for something like 20 years.
Yep, over
Correct?
20 years, about 21
Right.
years.
So that's like the meat of your career. That's like a very, very big part of your career, right? Because everything else was like 5 years, 2 years, but that was the big part of your career. And when it came time to, have a plan to protect, whether it be the president, former president, or a politician, how did that differ? Because, then you're having to actually like carry out different plans every day, like how did that look?
Well, it's a different role, and it's like anything else. You start off, first of all, you start off at basics. You go to a training academy, and the specific agency teaches you the things that you need to know to perform that job. And like anything else, my first day out of the training academy, I was not the lead agent for a presidential movement. I started off at a smaller role. I was a poststander. I had a role somewhere within that field, but as you matured and as you gained experience, you took on a larger responsibility. And that was really the way that it worked with the Secret Service. But I do think that what happens is you become better at something because of other things that you've done in the past, because you gather experience. And you gather experience, and you learn from different ways that you may have tried to do something that didn't work right, or something that you did that worked perfectly, and you can use that in another form.
Right. Yeah. And in a bit of our like conversations that we had prior to the interview, right? So I remember I spoke to you over the phone about this. It was with regards to celebrities, right? And I guess VIP people that you had to protect, right? How would a celebrity differ from protecting somebody like the president or a politician?
Totally different, for the main reason that when you're protecting a celebrity, very rarely do you have additional assets. When you're protecting the president, you have multiple layers of security. You have a checkpoint 3 or 4 blocks away from where the president is, where nobody gets past that checkpoint unless they're screened, unless they're supposed to be there, depending on the situation. You have multiple post standards. You have federal laws and federal statutes that you can use to limit a crowd for a president. A celebrity, it's really you and the celebrity, and you're walking out into the street, and you get what you get. I've never done physical protection for a celebrity. I've done work throughout the years where celebrities were in attendance to either events that we had protectees, the Secret Service handled, or currently with Salesforce, events that celebrities are present. But I've never done physical protection of a celebrity, of that type of work. That's not my expertise. It was more from a government standpoint, or a site security, or an overall security measure. But it's I give people that do celebrity security a lot of credit, because they're really, they really don't have the assets that we had in federal law enforcement. We had police officers assigned to us. We had a lot of assets that made it more of a team effort, but also gave us a much better chance of securing the location that protectee was at.
Right. So it's a lot less resources to the people that are doing celebrity work.
I'm sorry.
It's a lot less resources for those that are doing celebrity
Most
work.
most definitely, most definitely.
Right.
When you get to a certain point, it is. You may be in a Grammy Awards where there's security all over the place, but at some point you're going to get in a car with a celebrity and you're going to drive them to their hotel or to their apartment, and it's going to be your team and the celebrity. You don't have any of those external assets like we had in federal security and you know dignitary security, so to speak.
Well, here would be an interesting question I just thought about. When it comes to celebrities, a lot of their security tends to be private, right?
Yep.
It's usually they hire a bodyguard, they trust that bodyguard, whatever. But with, the government, that's a public resource basically, right? That's public taxpayer money. And obviously there's a lot more resources in and of itself there, right? And there's people around the clock trying to protect the president, to your point about the resources. But could the president theoretically hire their own security? Or if they've had bodyguards that they trusted for years, could they have that, like in the case of Donald Trump?
No, they they can. The Secret Service is tasked by federal law to protect the president of the United States and other dignitaries, whether it be a foreign head of state while in country, a former president of the United States, an acting vice president, their family, a former first lady, different things that it's a by law there needs to be Secret Service protection. Now, in the case of Donald Trump, his protective detail when he wasn't president, he could still keep them on as a member of his staff, but their primary role would not be the protection of him. That's a Secret Service. That's a federal law that's the Secret Service has to provide that protection.
Right. Well, President Trump was generally an unorthodox president, a lot of people would say. Like, regardless of your thoughts on him. And he did, when he was a billionaire before becoming a president as a celebrity, right, he would have his own security. And I think one of his bodyguards' name was like Walt Nauta or Walter, for example, right? So like how would that work, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, really, what would happen with that is the detail that was working President Trump would meet with the individual from Trump's staff, and we'd go over parameters, we'd go over guidelines, and we would really come to we would have to have a discussion, and everybody would know what their role was. There could be a very good role for somebody who had prior experience in executive protection to help the Secret Service with a new protectee because they know the things that we're looking at, things we're looking for. I think it would be basically more in a communication, a communication perspective where we would know what they were doing. We would have better intel as to what was going on, which would help us. So it could only be, but you would have to set parameters. Parameters would have to be set up on that because at the end of the day, the most important thing is the safety of the president, regardless of who. We've had presidents that their staff. We really the staff has a large say in the overall activities of the president, but they need to coordinate with the Secret Service to figure out the best way to accomplish what needs to get done from a presidential standpoint and also from their safety standpoint. And it's a fine line that needs to be worked out.
Right. So it could happen, but it's complicated in some cases.
No, I don't think it's complicated. I think it's there's very very few people who become president or no people that I know of that become president who haven't had some position of power prior to that. So they may have had a protective detail as a child because their father was the president. They may have been the governor of a state where they had a protective detail while they were the governor of a state. There are all different scenarios where they are familiar with security. Now, there's a higher level security with the Secret Service because somebody is a president, obviously. And what you really need to do is to strike regardless of who your protectee is, to strike a balance to allow the individual to do what they need to do, whether it be at a campaign rally, whether it be whatever it is, whatever function they want to do in a safe manner. And that's the Secret Service's responsibility.
Right. So it can work.
Sure.
But
Yeah, and it did work. I've never seen it where it hasn't worked.
right. So when it came to, protecting the president, were you ever like in close proximity of the president or former presidents? Like how would like your
Well,
personal relationship work?
Well, President Clinton he was a former president when I was on his detail, and I was assigned to him along with a team of other agents for approximately 3 years, a little bit over that. And we were, there were times that I would drive them. There were times that I would, I would go for a walk with them. There were all different times that you were in close proximity. The president, not so much. You'd have to be on the presidential protective detail, but even that is such a large detail that you don't really get that same access as you do with a former president. The head of the protective protection detail they would be the person who would communicate with the acting president. But we also had leaders in our detail was called WCD, William Clinton Division. We had leaders within that division that would communicate. But there were times that, we'd be in an elevator and, President Clinton would ask us a question. Hey, what happened here? Or Mrs. Clinton would ask us a question, and we'd answer the question. It was simple, So you had that interaction, and really, I think the key with that was just to, you speak when you're spoken to, and you give an honest answer. But what you try to do is you try not to put yourself in a position where you are over communicating with them, because you have a job to do. If they want to communicate with you, you're polite. You answer the question for whatever reason, but you don't overextend yourself. That's not your role. You're not there to chit chat with your protectee. You're there to ensure their safety.
Did you ever get into like a very long, meaningful conversation with any of them, or no?
No. We talked about different things that you kid around. Sports. Say today I was in a motorcade with President Clinton today. Maybe the Super Bowl would come up, the discussion of the Super Bowl. And just, he'd be interested in it. He'd ask someone a question. We'd answer, hey, how about that game? Or small talk. That's pretty much it. If he was done with the game of golf, maybe he'd talk about his game of golf while we were in the vehicle together. We'd talk about it, and, he would make his comments, and we would give our, 2 or 3 cents, and that would be it. But that's not our role. Our role was a Secret Service agent's role is not to be, buddy with their protectees. However, you still need to be open to hearing the needs that they have if they ask you something. But that's really not your role.
Right. So it was, just very
Professional.
at best, 5-minute conversation at best.
Maybe I wouldn't even say that long. I would say
Right.
that way, maybe off and on. It depends. We were on private planes. It all depends. It all depends on it wasn't a regular thing. It just happened to be. But the majority of the times, the conversations started with the president to us.
Right.
I wouldn't go up to President Clinton and say, "Hey, President Clinton, did you watch the game last night?" Wouldn't happen. Doesn't work that way. That's not what you're there to do. That's not your role.
Right. Would you ever say good morning or?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Good morning. How are you? That would be the first thing you would do with any protectees, specifically if you were driving them. What you would do is when they got in the car in the morning, you would say, good morning, sir, ma'am. And then if they happen to ask you a question about something during that route, that drive, well, you would answer it. But you weren't there to elicit conversation, because most of the time, a president or anybody that we protected, they use their time while in a motorcade to still conduct business. They could be on phone calls. They could be going over their speech that they were getting ready to do. It was very little downtime for people like that. So they needed time to concentrate on whatever they were doing, and it wasn't my place to interrupt that time.
So yeah, so it was a very, very professional relationship with them.
Exactly.
You
Yep.
know, were there any people that ever had any close relationships with the president?
No, everything's professional. From a Secret Service standpoint, you have to be professional because that's your job. That's your one responsibility is for the safety of your protectee, regardless of who it is. That's the number one thing you have to do. Now, there's different levels of some people would like to talk to their Secret Service people more than others, but it all depends. But again, it was at the discretion of the protectee for that, and it wasn't a role. And that's the one thing. That's the one thing that we learned, and it was embedded into us as soon as training started. That you were there to be you protected your protectee. That was your job. You were not their friends. You were not there. You didn't have any other role but the protection of that individual. And you needed to be professional. You needed to be polite. You needed to be professional, and you needed to build a mutual respect.
Right, yeah. So you're just, you know, you protected them and that was it. That was your whole job and there was
That's it.
nothing. Yeah. So
That's it.
well, a lot of people also, when they talk about the Secret Service, they tend to think about it as just the protector of, just the guys with the suits and the earpiece, right? And they just protect the president. But there's also the aspect of counterfeit money, right? And protecting counterfeit and getting rid of counterfeit money. Were you ever part of that?
Yep, I did work some counterfeit cases. I was never assigned to the counterfeit squad, which they did that full time. But there was times when I was assigned to the White Plains office where we did all different types of investigations, and I did some counterfeit investigations, and I assisted the counterfeit squad on some counterfeit investigations in New York City.
How did that look? Like who were the major perpetrators for counterfeiting, for example?
All different. There were several countries that money came into. There was two types of counterfeit. There were printing press counterfeit, which was a better, higher quality counterfeit, and there were printers, just your computer printer, or copies, and people would pass counterfeit in either way, and sometimes it would work. It wasn't good counterfeit, it wasn't high quality counterfeit, and it was detected, but at some different times it worked, depending on how it was used. And sometimes people would pass it to, they could pass it out of deli, they could pass it out of a convenience store. They could use it to buy drugs in a quick transaction. Somebody would take it. So there's all different levels of counterfeit currency, of the quality of it, but it never got to the point where it couldn't be detected by the Secret Service, because there was only one genuine currency and everything else had some sort of difference than the genuine currency.
Right. Well, the exact way like that, I guess, money is printed and money is made, right? That's a secretive process. Like,
Yeah.
nobody, or at least nobody's supposed to know it except for, I guess, people that work in the exact process of printing money. So how exactly would the Secret Service be able to detect? Was it always by eye? Was it sometimes like you would have to take like a UV, or like how would that work?
A lot of different ways. Sometimes you could do it by touch in cases where it's not that quality. There were times that we could do it by serial number, where what we can do is if certain currency was already found to be counterfeit that had, certain serial number. If we found another note that had the same serial number, well, that's counterfeit. Just found it in a different location because it was mass produced with the same serial number. We had experts at headquarters who were trained and were at a higher level than us, that they could determine if it was counterfeit or not. But the overwhelming majority of the money that was counterfeit that we found, we could determine just by lack of certain security features that genuine currency had. That these didn't. They may have had, say, there's four security features. That note had three, didn't have the fourth, or the fourth one that it had, it was terrible. It wasn't good quality. Then you could figure out that it wasn't. And we would always send that to headquarters, to the counterfeit division, and then they would be the ultimate. They would be the ultimate decider of if it was genuine or if it was counterfeit. But 99.9% of the time, on the local level, the agent level, we would be able to decide whether it was counterfeit or genuine by the means that we had at our disposal.
Something I've always wondered when it came to counterfeit money would be if, let's just say, counterfeit money somehow gets its way into the money supply, right? Which I guess would be the worst fear of, the federal government. But when that happens, right, and let's just say I were to get in like my hands on one by accident, like if I'm making a transaction with, wherever, like if I ask somebody for change and that person was handed counterfeit by whatever means, and I go to buy something with that, how would that work on my part? Like, am I going to be questioned?
Okay. Well, you'd probably be questioned if the investigation could lead to you. But there was really two elements of the counterfeit. It was knowingly exchanging it, which means you had to know that it was counterfeit. If you didn't know it was counterfeit, there's no crime. Now, unfortunately, what would happen is we would confiscate it, and you would be out whatever that amount of money was. You wouldn't be reimbursed for it. If a bank, someone made deposits at a bank, banks are the number one place where tellers could tell if it was counterfeit or if it was genuine. Just because they handle so much money, they could tell by feel. If it was determined that if somebody made a $2,000 deposit and $500 of that money was counterfeit, well, they would get $1,500 in their account, and they would be out $500. I believe they could use it as a tax deduction, but they would not be reimbursed for that money. But again, they wouldn't be charged for a crime unless we had the ability to determine that the person knew that it was counterfeit and tried to pass it. I think uttering of a counterfeit note is the terminology in the federal code.
Is there like a business when it comes to selling counterfeit money? Could you sell counterfeit money?
Legally?
Illegally, obviously, but
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be a business. There's an illegal trade, and a lot of the counterfeit at the time that I was investigating those crimes they went hand in hand with drugs. It was counterfeit money along with drugs. In parts of the world that were producing large amounts of drugs also had counterfeit, were producing counterfeit money. So we saw that a lot. But there's no, it was organized crime, no doubt. It was just a different form of organized crime. There were times that organized crime members did get involved in counterfeit currency. There were times that, drug dealers got involved in counterfeit currency. So, but for it to be a business, but if it was a business, it would be considered an illegal business because it's never legal to pass counterfeit currency.
when it comes to like the markers that different places have, like gas stations, for example, like they'll put a marker on something if they think it's a fake bill. How does that work?
Well, with that marker is sensitive to the texture of the note. So really good quality counterfeit, that marker is not going to work. But the vast majority of the counterfeit, that marker is going to shine a different color, however it's set up. And that will let the merchant know that it is counterfeit currency. It's a chemical. It's a chemical reaction. That's really all it is. It's the chemicals that are in the marker counteract with the note itself, which causes it to determine that it's counterfeit.
So, what's the procedure if they find out that it's counterfeit?
If they find out it's counterfeit, what they're supposed to do is supposed to call the police. The police will come and they will take the money as evidence. They will then call the Secret Service. The Secret Service needs to determine if it's counterfeit or not. Sometimes we can do that right over the phone. We did it right over the phone. If counterfeit money was found in a vehicle during an arrest, and the police confiscated it. Hey, we have these notes. We don't know if they're legitimate or not. Can you check them? We would be able to go in our database, and if there was a history of that serial number being used somewhere else that was determined to be counterfeit, we could predict that was a counterfeit note. And at that point, we would tell them it was counterfeit, save it. Eventually, we would come and we would take it, we would turn it over to us. Maybe we would work a federal investigation for that, or we could just charge the individual with a state crime.
Right. So when it comes to when you were talking about whether or not the serial number was used in a different place, right? How would you know that? Like, because it's
We
not
have
digital.
nope, there's a database. What would happen is if you were in Chicago, Illinois, and you had an arrest for what you thought was counterfeit money, you determined that it was counterfeit money, all of those note serial numbers would be entered into a Secret Service database. So number ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is in that database. The same note with a different note with the same serial number is now used in New York and makes its way to New York. First thing you do is you check that note in that database with those serial numbers to see if the note has a history. And if it has a history, well, then now you know it's counterfeit. But at some point, it had to be a new note, because there's always the first time that something gets passed that's counterfeit that it gets discovered. However, from that point on, you could have made, there could have been 1,000 of those notes in circulation, or thousands of those notes in circulation, and in time they just show up in different locations.
So they would all look exactly the same, or?
No, all different. Like I said, all different ways. There's different qualities. There's some that's good quality counterfeit. There's some that's bad counterfeit. It all depends how it's made, and it all depends, really.
Did you ever find any counterfeit that was nearly indistinguishable? Like to the point where even you were looking at it like there's no way that this is counterfeit, but yet it was.
Now, I always had, there was some, like I said, there's some counterfeit that's better than others, but there's always something that distinguishes it as counterfeit because of the multiple safeguards that genuine currency has. There's always something that's not done right or correctly that makes it where it can be discovered. So there hasn't been anybody that's been able to make a perfect note, let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, if they did, how would you know?
We wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
Well, we wouldn't by determining it, but you know what? At some point along the line, like most criminal investigations, it would come to our attention that there was somebody out there that was doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. Say somebody else could be arrested. They could have knowledge of this individual. It could be their benefit to tell us about this individual to help them. And then we could investigate it from that point. And then at some point we would get to where we would uncover that counterfeit, which we would call a plant. And then we would see it, and now we would know that was in circulation. But again, the government has changed. What has happened throughout the years, the government has adapted currency to make it more counterfeit proof. Different identifiers, different security marks, different things, different things to make it tougher to counterfeit. And as technology increases, well, we have to increase with it.
and when it came to your success as an officer of the law, of whatever kind that might take, right, for lack of a better term, an officer of the law, right, member of law enforcement, what attributed to your success in law enforcement?
I think the first it all comes down to hard work. Now, nobody's ever perfect, what you need to do is you need to work hard to hone your craft. You have to learn what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And, like from a investigative standpoint in an interrogation or an interview, you have to know what your strengths are, and you have to use those strengths to get what you want, what is the truth, eventually where it goes. So, I think what you need to do, it helps to be able to effectively communicate. It helps to be able to build a rapport with people. I think all those things definitely help, and in time you get better at it. It's just like anything else.
Right. So you attribute it to just time for the most part.
Yeah, time and hard work and learning your craft and learning yourself, figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you're good at, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. Just like anything else. Just like a professional athlete. You might have a guy that's a baseball player, throw the ball 99 miles an hour down, and guy can hit it a country mile. But you put a little bit of spin on it, you slow the speed down a little bit, guy can't hit it. So what does he have to do? Got to practice on breaking stuff. Eventually he gets better at it as time goes on. Doesn't get better at it, he's not in the major leagues anymore. Pretty much the same idea. Takes time, but you have to have it also helps to learn from your people who are experienced. It's a process. It's really a process, and it takes time, but you have to learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
Did you ever get in contact with, like the directors of any agencies or like the higher leadership?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I did while I was assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I was the Secret Service liaison for the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York. So when there was any intelligence that went on that could affect any of our protectees or anything that was going on within our area of responsibility, I would speak with the leadership of the Secret Service in those cases. We would brief them on those issues.
Did you ever, when it came to with regards to your protectees, right, and like the people that you have protected, right? Is there any position that was harder than others to protect?
A position as far as a role within that protective detail?
Well, I mean, as in the actual protectee themselves. Like, was there, like, let's just say you had to protect a governor versus a senator versus a this or like that.
Yeah, we didn't protect. We protected the president, the vice president, any former presidents, all of their families, and any foreign heads of state while on U.S. soil. We wouldn't protect the governor. The state police would protect the governor. Senators were protected by the Capitol Police or New York State or state police, depending on the situation or where they were. So we really didn't handle that. But really, you had some protectees, some foreign dignitaries were tough. They came into New York and they were on a very long schedule where they were going, 16, 17, 18 hours a day. And most of the time you were assigned to them for the full day. Very rarely you would have shifts where you would be relieved and somebody else would come and take over. So a lot of long days, a lot of, depending on the campaigns, were a very tough time because campaigns, the idea of a campaign is to shake as many hands as possible. You're not benefiting yourself by getting 10 hours of sleep in a hotel room when you're running for office. So you're out, you're in multiple cities, you're moving around, you're at multiple events, you're busy. So a lot of it all depends. It all depends. There's times that some protectees are down. You could have, President Clinton and at that time Senator Clinton, who became the Secretary of State. They were very active people in their day-to-day roles in their profession. But if they were on vacation, we might not see them for a day. They might stay in the hotel room. They might go to the pool. They might stay outside, or they might go to dinner at night, and we don't see them all day. So it all depends on the situation and it depends on the protectee, and it depends on what they're trying to accomplish at that particular time. But I think it can, as a general rule, you could say that, the people we protected, they were busier than most because of their role and the importance of their position and the things that they had to do. They're very busy people. And that's one of the things that I saw from the people that I protected, whether it was just an assignment I did assignments for Jimmy Carter, for Gerald Ford, for George Bush Sr., or Mrs. Bush. And the one thing that you saw was that they were very active people, and they could still do what they had to do on not a lot of sleep, where they could be somewhere at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, depending on what the event is, be back up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and be at 7 a.m. at NBC Studios doing a broadcast and being interviewed and not miss a beat. So that was just a skill that I generally saw with people that we protected. They had the ability to do that. Very, very high energy.
Right. Well, were there any people like particularly that were harder to protect me because of their habits, the way that they, maybe they were a little bit like it could have been anything, their habits or personality, whatever. They were just
Yeah. Well, a lot of it was the point of life that they were in. A 75-year-old protectee is much different than a 50-year-old protectee, regardless of who it is. It's really, I wouldn't go so much to signal out an individual. What I would do for a more accurate answer, I would go by what their role was at that point. If they came into New York City to hit the media circuit, they were going to do an interview for ABC. They were going to go see CBS. They were going to do CNN. They were going to have a journalist was going to come to their hotel room and do a story on them. Irregardless of who it was, they were busy. We were running. We were all over the city that day. So I think it more has to do with what role they were in and what they were trying to accomplish during their time in New York or where they were at their time. Bill Clinton at age 55, getting out of office and trying to, have a new career, whether he's writing books, whether he's giving speeches, whether he's doing that. At 55, he's a heck of a lot more active than he is at 75, just because of his life situation at that particular time. And the same is true for anybody else. Jimmy Carter, more active. Jimmy Carter we did book signings. He wrote books. He came up to New York and we ran around the city with him and he was selling his books. He did book signings. He gave speeches. He went to a college. He lectured. He went to a news station, did an interview. So he was just as busy as Bill Clinton at that stage of his life because they were really trying to do the same things.
right. And when it comes to not necessarily personalities, but family members, right, of, certain people they have to protect, right, other than the president, were there any, I guess, positions like, for example, the first lady maybe that might have been harder to protect, or even their kids, for example?
Well, I think as a general rule, the children of presidents were very tough because, your age right now, do you want somebody to be with you at all times that can tell your parents what you're doing? Probably not. And that's what they went through. So they were a challenge as a rule. And again, that has to do with the specific point of their life. Doesn't have to do with them as individuals. There were no bad kids, or they were going through a stage of their life, like the Bush daughters, for example. They wanted nothing to do with the Secret Service because they wanted to be free. They wanted to live their lives, which a 20, 21-year-old person, I get it. I'd want to be in the same boat as them. As they get older, they change. Different protectees, the the, uh, 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 the, Obama girls. As they got older, same thing. When they were little, it was different because they didn't have the same desires to go out and do what they wanted to do. That's one of the challenges. It's so tough on a family. First ladies, the same thing. We have different first ladies. Hillary Clinton was a very active first lady. She did a lot. She was almost a co-presidency when they were in office. So she was out and running around. She was very busy. Other first ladies, like Mrs. Bush, the senior, Barbara Bush, she wasn't as active. But I also protected her when she was older, so a different stage. I wasn't with her when George Senior was in office, so I don't know. But I think you can really, the general rule is it's more of that stage of your individual life and what you're trying to accomplish. I think it's not. I don't think you. I think you will find that most presidents or people who hold office have more similar traits than different traits.
So when it came to like the kids and people like that, right? That's an interesting topic. So if the Secret Service were to, you mentioned that like they would be able to tell on the kids, right?
Yeah. Well, the kids thought that. The kids thought that. That
They
wasn't that
felt that way.
wasn't what our job was. That's what they felt. That's what they figured. Oh, this adult's going to tell my dad that I was in a bar in New Haven, Connecticut till 2 o'clock in the morning. But again, that's not our role. And really, one of the most important things that you need to do to effectively protect people as a Secret Service agent is build trust with them. They need to know that they can live their life, and your role is to protect them. That's it. Your role is not to judge what they do. Your role is not to delve into their personal life. Your role is to protect them. And once they can, and that comes with time. That comes with time that that they did stay out in a bar until 2 o'clock in New Haven, Connecticut, and their dad never knew about it. So that builds trust, and you need that because what you need is information, and you need your protectee to trust you and to allow you to do your job. Without that, there could be a lot of problems.
Right. So there was never anybody that got told on by the Secret Service.
Not that I know of. No.
Yeah.
Not from me personally or anything that I heard of throughout the years. That was not that would be against the things that we did, just because of that ability to build rapport with your protectees.
Right. So ultimately, but if they were doing something, let's just say illegal, right? Whatever that might be.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
and it would be a different. Then if they were doing something that could affect their safety, then we would need to speak to our superiors, who would have communication with their relative, whether it be father, uncle, whatever the situation was.
So, like, let's just say, for example, marijuana, for example, that's a relatively legal drug in certain states. Let's just say, there was a kid whose dad was a president, and he decided to do that, right, in a state, even where it might have been legal, but federally it's still illegal. So, would you would you, should you tell their parent?
No, we wouldn't tell the parent unless it got to the point that what they were doing could affect their safety. And that was our concern. That was our chief concern. That was our only concern.
Right. Yeah. So you're not a parenting agency, basically.
That's not what we're here for. We're not babysitters. We weren't babysitters. We were there for their safety and for what was their best interest. And and like I said earlier, that was necessary because you needed to have that rapport. They needed to trust you. Something was going on. They needed to talk to you. They needed to. You needed them on your side to have an effective relationship, and that was all the protectee protector relationship, which is very important.
When it came to like close family of the president, who would you and who wouldn't you protect?
Well, they could be designated. There would need to be a risk. There would need to be a set risk, which could be determined. but the president could designate, like towards the middle of my career, cabinet members became designated as Secret Service protectees. Before, we didn't have any, but we were also in the war of terror. So the threat level was much higher. So it's all threat based. A protectee, there are senators that don't have protection that are U.S. senators because there's no threat assessment, there's no risk. It's all based on risk.
So, for example, the director of, I don't know, the NSA, for example, theoretically, they could be either protected or not protected just simply based on how highly you think the threat is to their life.
Definitely, definitely. Now there were times that there were internal security teams. The NSA could have their own security team that could provide a protective assignment. If the threat level got high enough, then it would get to the Secret Service, and the Secret Service would pick up that detail.
Right. And I don't know if and I've asked this to a Navy SEAL that was on here, right? There was a team a few years ago, or not a few years ago, but years ago in the SEALs, for the Navy SEALs, something called Red Cell, where their job was to effectively break in to different government offices and such. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Not them specifically, but there's a thing that we call pen testing, which is penetration testing. And those are used as exercises to check the security level at different locations. So that's something that does go on, and I'm aware of that. Any of the specifics of that, I don't know, but it's accepted in the corporate world too. It's from a IT security now, from intrusion. That's very big. Penetration testing, pen testing. It's kind of the same thing. If I believe that would be what they were alluding to.
Was there ever any people that you ever, as and I guess this is a little bit related to our past question of if you ever spoke to any of the presidents and any of the people that you protected, but were there any people that you protected that I guess they were, and I feel like this might have been more the kids, but like that you had spoken to more, they were asked you more, they spoke to you more?
Well, Bill Clinton was he liked to talk. He'd talk to anybody. And he talked to people on the street. He talked to people in an airport. Any time that he was around people, he loved to talk. He loved to communicate. So I'd say he was the number one person who would talk. And he talked to us, and he got to know us. And a lot of it, he golfed a lot. So a lot of times after golf, we wouldn't golf, but we'd be close enough where we would be able to watch. And he would say, on the 15th hole, hey, did you see that drive I made on the 15th hole? And or I can't believe I was on the green in 2 and then I 3-putted and stuff like that. So after a while, depending on the personality of the protectee and how much they like to talk and to communicate, a lot of times these protectees are isolated, so they don't have a lot of opportunities to talk to a lot of different people at certain times. So they do like to communicate with their detail. So I would say he was one of the most chatty protectees we had that I had the pleasure of protecting.
So here's a bit of a funny hypothetical I've had with my friends, right? So let's just say you wanted to surprise a president, right? In some way. And if you wanted to hold like a surprise party, would that be allowed?
Okay, well, who would hold the surprise party? You?
Well, let's just say it was like, if I was, I don't know, the son of the president, right? And I wanted to hold a surprise party. How would that work?
Okay, well, what happens with the president? Everything is scheduled. Everything is scheduled, and you need to. There's an itinerary that comes out, and Secret Service agents are assigned to different events. So there could be an event that would be on what we call a line block, which is the president's daily schedule or the former president's daily schedule. You know, Bill Clinton birthday party. So yes, you could. The right person could. Someone that has the ability. That would all be approved by the president's staff, and it would be an official event that they sponsored, that they knew about. So there would be no pure surprise party. You know, it doesn't work that way. The staff would know, and then we would have access to their schedule, and then we would plan accordingly from a protective standpoint to make sure that everything they did that day, irregardless, whatever it was, there was that they were safe, and it was a security. There were security measures and security practices in place.
And here's another one. So when it comes to interviews that the president does, right? How does that exactly work? Right? Like I always see journalists like getting interviews with the president, for example, like whether it be Biden or even former presidents like Trump. But like how does that really work, right? Because
that's all scheduled with the staff. That has nothing to do with the Secret Service. It's all scheduled with the staff. They decide what the president's going to do, what the president's not going to do. Like I said, they alert us via a official schedule, and then we provide security based upon that schedule.
So when you say the staff, right, do you mean, because that's a term that you've been using throughout the interview, right, like throughout the podcast. So when you say staff, do you mean like the literal cabinet staff, or do you mean like just like assistants?
No, I mean their political staff. Depending on there's different how many members, depending on if they are a president, if they're a former president. There's people who are the chief of staff for President Clinton. And they have a staff within that team. They have a team. They would decide on all that stuff. They would get together with the president and they would say, okay, you have a request from ABC to do an interview next Tuesday. Do we want to do it? They decide if they want to do it. They say yes. We're notified of it. We send an agent a couple of days in advance to do an advance of the studio that's being conducted in. We conduct motorcade routes to get to that location, and we provide security while they are in that location. That's really the role. That's the flow of a situation like that. Now you would just you would have to say, for instance, you wanted to interview President Clinton. I know you would never want to do something like that, but just in case you ever did, really, what the first thing you would have to do is you would have to initiate some communication with the staff making that request. They would decide if they wanted to do it. They would notify you, yes or no. If they said yes, then you would talk further. If not, you would be told, no, we don't want to talk to you, and it would be done.
Right. So every president has different methods of communication, basically.
Yep.
All right. I think that's a pretty good place to end off. Is there any last words or comments that you want to say to the audience? Anything you want to share with the world?
Anything I want to share with the world? Nope. We're in the business of not sharing much in the Secret Service. So not necessarily. I just, really just to end it, I think that, I would give, I know one of the things that we talked about that we didn't touch on was, advice that you could give to somebody that wanted to get into this field. Really the key that I would say is to just not do anything wrong that would impede your ability to get a clearance. That's the number one reason why people can't get into this line of work, because they can't get a clearance. They did something in their past. There's something that they did that doesn't go within the guidelines of a top security, a top secret clearance. So that was it. That's just if you like to get in this field. I think it's a good field. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. It's challenging. It's a lot of fun. It's different. But there is, like anything else, there are pluses and minuses to anything. But thanks a lot, George. I appreciate your time, and thanks for reaching out to me. And I hope I answered your questions.
You did indeed. And I want to talk to you a little bit after the show. So I'm just going to stop recording and we'll talk from there.
Works
All
for
right.
me. Thank you.